Hello, welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. My name is Amanda, and I'm your wonderful co-host, along with my fabulous co-host.
Hello, I'm Meagan.
Hey. So we are your destination for imperfect. Today has been a day. It's like my third try to get this episode intro done. So imperfect, progressive, secular community in the homeschool world.
Exactly. So if you are tired of super shiny influencers with perfect blowouts who are always sharing their Pinterest perfect homeschool lives, you're in the right place because we are not those people, right? Now, we also aren't those people that show up and bitch about hanging out with our kids, though, like, oh, these kids constantly, right? We love
Yeah.
being with our kids. We love homeschooling, but that doesn't mean that some days aren't just completely hard AF, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, today's episode, we're going to be dealing with some of the challenges that homeschool parents face, specifically talking about homeschool backlash. If you haven't experienced homeschool backlash yet, you most likely will one day, or perhaps you'll be supporting a fellow homeschooler who's going through it at that time.
Absolutely. Now, before I say my next bit, I'm just going to say that this episode is going to be great for the bloopers reels. I'm telling you, our Patreon bloopers reels are going to be off the chain just from this one episode. We're struggling so bad today. So not shiny perfect. All right. So
No.
what do we mean? What, good Lord, what do we mean by homeschool backlash? It could be anything from that fringe aunt quizzing your kids on their multiplication tables at a family gathering to, your mother-in-law's steady drumbeat of comments about how your kids are going to be weird and unprepared or just completely messed up if you continue on this bonkers homeschool crusade of yours.
Exactly. All of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as you mentioned, we are imperfect. So before we dive into our topic, we always like to kind of start with a recap of our week. So you've had a day. How about the rest of your week, Amanda? How's it going?
My week has been a little challenging. And big picture, I will say this morning I got together with a friend for brunch to celebrate her birthday.
Oh,
I'm a solid week late making it happen because the week has been so incredibly bad and like trying to get it scheduled. But the first thing that I said, she said, so how's your week been? And I said, this morning I'm really struggling to figure out if I'm just a hormonal perimenopausal bitch or if everyone in my life is incompetent this week. And we talked about it quite a bit. We decided it's a combination of both. So I'm just going to put that out there. I'm sorry. The hormones might be getting the best of me this week. So in our world, my kiddo started kind of his full-time schooling. This is the week that most of his online classes started. And so we're doing some other stuff. And then he has online diagnostics that we do with our state for like state testing stuff. Not the actual state testing, just the assessment at the beginning of the year. And then they use the same tool at the end of the year. So there's a combination of that. And then making sure that he gets into all of his online classes, right? Trying to make sure that I'm available and that we keep track of like which one, because they're random, right? It's an hour here and an hour there. And I was late getting on to record today because he had art class and he had to have his black paper and his pastel paper and his chalk pastels and his oil pastels. And then he had to have a baby wipe and he had to have, like just all of these things. And he's like, I know we have these. Where is it? What can I have? And then like, I'm like, okay, well, I'll wait until the class like actually gets going to make sure you have everything and you're like doing the art before I go log on. And then we love this teacher. She's a great teacher. But at the same time, every class starts like 25 to 30 minutes late because they spend that much time like talking. And so I'm like, okay, like just get out whichever piece of paper we need. Like, is it the black one or is it the white one or is it the textured one or is it this one? Like, just pick paper and start on the project because I have things I need to do. And that's just like kind of how my whole week has been, right? Like my whole week has been a combination of like, oh my God, can we just focus and get it done? Like we got a lot of stuff to do. Like, let's just get it done. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah.
What's going on?
The usual chaos. One of my kids had surgery last week, though, which was kind of a big thing. I don't remember if I mentioned that was happening or not when we recorded last. But yeah, and so, you and I have always been mindful of checking in with our kids, like what's okay to share and what's not. So I'm not sharing any of the details of that because typical teenage boy is like, please don't discuss my medical things on your podcast. But what I can say is that it's turned, when we went in for the surgery consult, the surgeon did say, like, until I get in there, I really can't tell you like how big of an impact is what's going on. And I was like, we knew that. Okay, fine, no problem. And the surgeon's been amazing. He's been wonderful. Like, I have his cell phone number. He's like, you can call me at 2 a.m. Like, whatever. I don't even have to go through the answering service. But it turned out to be a lot more invasive than what we thought, and a lot more post-operative management than what we thought. So it's just been kind of a chaotic week. But and he's my oldest, and so he's my kid too, that I can say like, hey, can you run to the store for me or whatever? And he's not clear to drive because of the meds that he's on and whatever, and nor is he just physically capable of driving. Let's not blame it on the meds. That just wouldn't be responsible. And so I'm just like down a human right now. My husband's out of the country, and so I'm like so used to having him as kind of like a right hand to be like, hey, he and my daughter will often team up to go grocery shopping if I need anything, because he can drive and she's better at finding things in the supermarket than he is. And so, usually he'll go and he'll just like play Pokemon Go at the shopping center where the grocery store is, and she'll go do the shopping, and then they link up and drive back home. And so I'm just like down a human right now, and then, just taking care of it. This stinks to watch your kid like not feel good and all that stuff too, and like he can't really move, and he can't really do any of the things that he enjoys. So hopefully by this time next week, the surgeon said like the beginning couple of weeks, like you should see like really monumental progress. And so hopefully by this time next week, it'll be a whole different story. But yeah, it's definitely been a week. So
Well, yeah. And I mean, the other thing too is like after any surgery, right? We, in our house, most of us have had some kind of surgery here recently, and it takes a lot to help with that person, right? So your work is doubled. And then if it's someone who is usually one of your helpers, right? One of the like home management people or something, like your work has doubled and now you're down manpower by a lot. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it feels like extra bad. And then, yeah, that thing, like you worry no matter who it is in your life, but you especially worry about your kids, right? That was at my brunch this morning. We were talking a ton about like how much as parents we try to, protect our kids while also understanding that, we have to let certain things happen, and finding that balance is so hard, right?
Yeah, it really can be, right? I totally get that. Yeah. So there you have it. But we are surviving, right? Just another week in the lives of rock star homeschool moms like us. It's in the books, and we're ready to tackle another day and another topic. And so, yeah, homeschool backlash. I mean, so have you gotten backlash for your choice to homeschool, Amanda? Like, have you experienced it?
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. I'd be shocked to find anyone who hadn't, especially someone who's listening to a secular progressive podcast who didn't receive some kind of backlash, right? Because it's not as well established in that community. And for me, it's been everything from like the little kind of passive aggressive comments of like, well, I mean, of course you're going to put him in regular school for middle school, right? Like that, or the, well, how do you know he's getting blah, 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 or aren't you worried that he's blah, blah, blah. And then, all the way to the other extreme where I had shared in a previous episode, I had a friend who was really like, I'm begging you, don't do this. Like, this is not a good educational option. And so, I mean, it runs the gamut, but we've definitely experienced it. How about you? I assume the same kind of thing, yeah?
I haven't had a ton,
Okay.
which has been nice, right? And we've been homeschooling since well before COVID, where now I feel like even there's like a little bit more understanding or acceptance, or you go with the flow when people say that they homeschool. But I did have one experience, and it was a couple of months before I was getting ready to pull my kids out of school. I was kind of getting my ducks in a row and all that stuff. And I was talking to a friend, and she just said, like, I don't understand. Like, how do you ever expect him to get a job? Meaning my oldest. How do you ever expect him to get a job if he's been homeschooled? And like, first of all, there's just so much ignorance in that statement, because lots of homeschool people are employed, right?
Yeah.
Lots of adults who were homeschooled. But then my other kind of thought of that was I worked with this person and I just remember thinking like, we hate our job. Like we've spent so much time crying under our desks, meeting up in the bathroom for cry sessions, escaping. One of my friends at work was a smoker, and I literally would join her in the little designated smoking areas at work. And I used to joke and be like, I'm just here for the secondhand. Like, I'd rather breathe in secondhand smoke than sit at my desk. Like, that's how much I hate my job, right? And so I was sitting there thinking, like, you hate your job as much as I hate my job. We work together, right? But this is what you think I want for my kids? Like, this is the ultimate goal, is for them to sit in a cubicle and cry under their desk every day? Like, this is not really the goal that I'm after. But I will say though, and it made me kind of do a moment of self-reflection. It's preparing for this episode. Like, am I just perceived as like a raging bitch that people don't question me, right? Because I think there is an art to kind of carrying yourself confidently and just it, even if you don't feel it, right? Fake it. I'm fairly certain that there are people in my family or whatever, especially at the beginning, who thought I was absolutely bananas for doing this, right? But I think if you just carry yourself confidently, there's kind of this, like, you can smile and you can be friendly and all that, but at the same time, hold yourself in a manner that just kind of loudly says, it's not fucking up for discussion. These are my children. Like, it's not up for discussion, right? And so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more today and kind of how you kind of go through that. And so even if you don't feel confident, there is kind of a thing about just putting on your big girl panties and just being like, oh, I've got this. I so have this, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty confident that like family members thought I was nuts. I mean, even my parents live with us, and my dad in the beginning, he never said anything to me, but he would say to my mom, like, I just don't really get it. Like, I just don't really understand the whole thing. But he never said anything to me. My mom was totally on board, but my dad he has a very traditional mindset on education. And he was just kind of like, and we're so not traditional, that he was just kind of like, what the hell is she doing?
Yeah.
But he never said anything. He let me do my thing. And now that we've been in it for so long, I think even if I had family members who were like, what the hell is wrong with this person? Like, my kids are succeeding. My kids are happy. They're well-spoken. They're, excelling in their educational endeavors, that it kind of, then it just shuts people up after a while anyway, right? Because then they're like, oh, wait, that's actually working. So I think that does help a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that mentality of like the proof is in the pudding. And I also think too that the amount of backlash you receive depends on a lot of factors outside of yourself, right? Like, so for me, I had spent years tutoring in public schools. I managed an after school program at one point. Like, I had a lot of ties to public education. I'd been a substitute teacher, like, lots of those kinds of things. And so I had a lot of people in my circle that were involved in that. And then also having spent a lot of my professional career in fundraising, nonprofit stuff, there's a lot of things that go into education and education reform and all of that. It's that whole community, right? And so I was in that, and my friends were in that. And then as I stepped away from it and I moved further and further away from it, my friends hadn't, right? They were still working there. They were still doing those jobs. And so, they haven't seen the same things. They're not experiencing the same things, or they're still in a place where they're trying to work within the system, even though they are experiencing the same things. They're like, well, yeah, but you could try this, but you could try that. And like, I could, and if that's what you want to do and that works for your family, by all means, I'm happy to hear that it works for your family, but it doesn't work for us. And that's not what we're going to do. Right. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. When pulling up your big girl panties and being confident about it just doesn't work, we have some ideas and suggestions for you. So, right, with that said, it seems only natural to kick off this whole discussion about homeschool backlash with a discussion on socialization. Right? It seems that it's the very first thing out of nearly everyone's mouth. Now, we can sit here and talk about how forced socialization in public school classrooms isn't really socialization, right? It's vertical socialization, but is it really socialization? We can share the meme about how the fourth grade teacher always said, we aren't here to socialize. But we already know that objection, for the most part, it's just BS, right? It's an easy, convenient thing to say, but it's not the actual concern. So if we're just going to talk about silencing homeschool backlash, one way to do it is to handle it with data.
All right. Yeah, I had to laugh when you said about fourth grade teachers saying it's not socialization time. So I have a friend from high school who I'm still really good friends with. She lives in New York. Every time we're up there, we try to get dinner and hang out and whatever. And we went to a very religious school. And so you could get away with things that you couldn't get away with in the public school system. And I will never forget threatening to have a book thrown at my head if she and I didn't stop talking. Right. And so we still talk about it to this day, because we're like, here we are still chatting away until like a restaurant closes at midnight, But yeah, we were not model students in that way. But yeah, I mean, people throw out that socialization crap, and I honestly think it's like they don't know what else to say, right? That it's just like, oh, okay. So one suggestion that we've come up with is to try stunning them into silence with something like, have you read Joseph Murray and Frank W. Mayburn's study on homeschooling? It talks a lot about socialization. I'd be happy to send it to you, right? Just throw it out there. They've never read the study. Okay. Yeah. They haven't read the study. They're not going to read the study, but I'd be happy to send it to you.
Yeah, right. That's the thing, right? They're not actually going to read a 56-page debrief of the study even, right? They're not going to read the entire study, and they're not going to read the 56-page summary of the study. Okay. But they're equally unlikely to admit that to you, right? So they're just not going to have the conversation again. But if they do bring it up because, they're just really tenacious, and we all know those people. There are those tenacious people in our life, especially the ones who want to tell us we're wrong. So we have some facts that you can throw out to them. The general synopsis of the study says that you have, so we're going to break it down into kind of the 4 parts, I think it is. So you've got social development. The study challenges the common perception that homeschoolers are socially isolated, right? Evidence shows that homeschooled students typically engage in a wide variety of activities, often more diverse than their traditionally schooled peers. We've talked about this before. This is not new, but this study says it, right? In print, they've researched it. They have this study. And it's not like from, homeschooling RS. So it's, homeschool kids, they participate in religious, social, sporting, and community activities, which contribute to their social skills and self-esteem. They are also known to have both vertical and horizontal socialization, which means they like same age, but also multi-ages, which is much more beneficial in the real world than only being able to talk to people who are exactly your same age or your same generation. All you have to do is open up social media to know that that's a struggle these days. And homeschoolers are found to be well-adjusted socially with strong self-concepts and good social skills.
Mm-hmm. So talking about people who will not read the 56-page study, can I confess that in order to get this 4 bullet point synopsis that we've got going here, I dumped all 56 pages into ChatGPT. Like, I did not read the 56-page study. So no one you send this to is going to read the study, right? And then I did cruise through the study a little bit afterwards to make sure that these were all valid, roll-ups of it. But they're never going to do it, right? So the next high-level takeaway from the study was about educational outcomes, and it talked about the fact that homeschoolers generally perform well academically, often scoring above the national average on standardized tests. However, the study does note, right, as Amanda pointed out, this is not done by some mega homeschool organization that's only going to promote pro homeschool. It's going to give us a very balanced look. So it also notes that the research based on homeschooling outcomes is relatively thin, making it difficult to draw definitive conclusions. But despite this, there is existing data that suggests that homeschooling does not disadvantage students academically. Boom.
Yeah, no. And I mean, the next kind of thing the study finds or points out is that homeschool kids have post homeschooling success, right? Students who pursue higher education tend to perform as well as their peers from traditional schools. They're also likely to be civically engaged and satisfied with their education, generally happy with how they learned and what they're learning and how it helps them. Now, again, the study does say the data on long-term outcomes of homeschoolers, particularly in the workforce, is limited. right? We see it more. It's becoming more common. And if you take a step back and you really look, almost every celebrity, um, every Olympic athlete, like there are loads of people that we really hold up that we know for sure were homeschooled in some way or another, right? They had tutors, they were on set, they were getting their education that way. And we see them, right? We see them on our TV screens, we see them in things, concerts and things that we pay for. So we are seeing plenty of homeschoolers, but there are plenty of other homeschoolers as well out there. This study just didn't actually go into the data on long-term outcomes in the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I completely agree with the civically minded thing. I actually almost had the nerve to ask you if we could reschedule this till tomorrow because Kamala and Tim Waltz are in Savannah, which is only like 90 minutes from us today. And so I talked to my daughter about it and I was like, do you want to go? And we both totally agreed that we wanted to see them. My daughter is like all in, but it's 9,000 freaking degrees out and you can't just go and hear them speak. You have to be there for like the whole day, right?
Yeah.
And security and listen to all the pre-people and there's gaps in between all the things and they couldn't tell us in advance if it was going to be indoors or outdoors and we were both like, okay, if there's something in like October when it's cooled down a little bit, we'll be there, but at the moment, no. But yeah, I mean, how many 15-year-olds are like, yes, I would like to take this entire day and go do, right? They're very involved in the social fabric, which is awesome. Speaking of social fabric, that is our last one. The study looks at the broader impact of homeschooling on society and public education. Now, there are definitely critics that are out there. I was talking to somebody just the other day who talked about the fact that homeschooling undermines the public good by withdrawing capital from the public school system, and also just kind of leaving, there is a financial tie to homeschooling, right? It does assume that there's a parent who can be home, that they can afford materials or curriculum, even though we've talked about the fact that homeschooling does not have to cost a lot. But for some people, even that amount is not attainable. We just have to be honest about that, right? And so there is kind of a classist element sometimes to some of these things that we talk about, right? But the study also suggests that homeschoolers are more civically engaged than the general population. So additionally, homeschooling may influence public education by encouraging the development of new educational models and more flexible schooling options. I think that's pretty optimistic, but because the public school system doesn't seem to be open to shifting on a dime, but there it is. That's the study suggested it. Who am I to disagree? So listen, the study is available online. It's a PDF file. We will link it in our resources. You can DM us for it anytime. If you have a mother-in-law who just will not freaking leave you alone, DM us. We will be happy to send you the study. Okay. You can offer them a copy also of Dr. Richard G. Medlin's study. He created a study that examined the social skills of homeschooled children, compared it to those in public school systems. Now, it highlights that while there is skepticism from the outsiders regarding the social development of homeschool children, research shows that homeschooling parents are committed to providing positive social experiences. The study uses the social skills rating system to compare social skills on things like cooperation, assertiveness, empathy, self-control between homeschooled kids and public school kids. The findings suggest that homeschooled children often score higher in these areas, particularly in empathy and assertiveness, which I love because those are kind of two, you don't want to say directly contradictory, right? But they're definitely not along the same vein, right? So it shows this really wide variety of emotional skill sets and regulatory skill sets that they can pull from. And it just challenges the whole notion that they're socially deprived, right? However, like the previous study, they're looking for more data, right? I mean, we only make up a small percentage of the population to begin with. As homeschoolers, that number grows steadily. But the more of us that there are and the more we can see the long-term effects of that, the better the data will get. But these should, in their current state, shut some people up, which would be really nice. So if somebody throws out an uninformed, baseless, what about socialization? Toss these to them. Put the onus on them. Here, read these. I'd love to hear what you think about them. They'll never read them and they're never going to come back to you and say, I never read those things, but I'm still going to question what you're doing, right?
Yeah, no, but now I'm going to say, I'm all about data, right? I'm all about the data. I love reading it. And I would probably actually read that study if someone recommended it to me. But I have sort of given up on giving people data. I just feel like in the current political environment we have going on, like very few people read anything that you send them, and even fewer people allow it to actually change their mind. And now maybe that's me being a little bit pessimistic about things right now, but for me, maybe I've been spending too much time with my kid and I feel like it's kind of like a war. But for me, I feel like the most effective way is to just cut off their approach, like just cut them off at the pass before they get where they're heading. Right. So um, I don't personally know anyone who is homeschooling completely in a silo. I don't, do you? I mean, I'm sure there are some people out there, but they're very few and far between. So, I mean, your kids, they're in classes with other students, whether that's virtually or in person. Maybe they go to a drop-off program like a co-op or an all-day class like my kiddo does. They play instruments and they participate in competitions, or they play sports with peers and they have coaches that they have to listen to that's not just you. You know, when they start, I just put a stop to it. He's in a dozen classes a year with peers. He loves his weekly all day class. And I love having the time to take care of other things while he's actually in someone else's class, right? And he's got weekly parkour and golf. Kids got way more of a social life than I do. End of story, right?
Yeah.
What more are they going to say? You just hit it all. You hit socialization with peers, time away from you, having to listen and take direction from teachers and coaches that aren't you. Like, you hit all of their concerns that they didn't even realize they had when they threw out this generic socialization. So now, honestly, they're probably going to say something else, but at least it's going to be what their real concern was, not this fake concern around socialization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have the choice still to shut down the next level concern or engage. And we're going to give you some engagement strategies that really run the gamut.
Yes. From kind to sit down and shut up.
Exactly. Right. So how will they ever be prepared for the real world is a big one. That's the one that I got, right? How do you feel qualified to teach them? And man, like what a crappy thing to do to a friend or family member who's doing what they think is best for their kid and all that kind of stuff, is to like plant this horrible seed of self-doubt in their brain, and then also kind of backhandedly tell them that they're stupid at the same time, right? Like,
I don't take it that way, because the reality is I can't teach my kid all of those things, right? But the idea that I would stop their education once I reach the point that is past what I remember of science or math or whatever, like that's the part that's insulting for me. Like, there are so many ways to access education. And if you want to have that conversation, like, ask me. I'm happy to have that. But don't imply that I'm going to be like, I only know through 5th grade science, so that's all you get to learn.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny, right? So I was thinking, like, whenever we go out at the end of the day for like a really big long walk with the dog, and we come back and she lays on the floor and she pants and she's so out of breath. We always joke that she looks like she's gonna just implode, And we always joke around like, gee, if only there was like this round container filled with a cool, refreshing liquid that you could go to, because she'll come home and never get a drink, right? And she just lays there and pants, right? And so it's like, I'm thinking about what you just said, like, gee, if only there was a resource of some kind where my kid could learn something beyond my 5th grade knowledge of atoms. Like, oh man, somebody should invent that, and just like show them the stupidity of the statement.
Interwebs.
Right?
Yeah,
like, gee, if only. Too bad, Well, I guess he'll just be an idiot forever, okay? So those are some options, right? Okay, this one. Oh, I got this from a cashier at the supermarket. I forgot about this level of backlash, right? This woman at the supermarket, right? And I think too, sometimes we have to factor in, and people's families will be made up of a beautiful tapestry of cultures as well, right? But it was a woman from the supermarket who was from India, and so she just culturally, of course, would have had a different education experience. It would look very different and feel very different than the US education system, and maybe culturally not as familiar with homeschooling as well as a concept. And she said, I was in the checkout line with my kids, and she goes, "Aren't you sad about all the things they're missing out on?" And I was like, "No, I'm not. But thanks for bringing it up, especially in front of my kids. That was really nice of you." But she was a super nice lady. Like she'd worked at I mean, she'd been at the supermarket for years. She was super duper nice. So I think it was just coming from like a genuine place of like us having very different backgrounds and her not having an understanding of what it looked like, right? So I don't think it was meant to be mean at all.
That's it. Sometimes people are just jerks and they don't want to learn. But I do really think that a lot of times it's just they don't understand, right? So much of what we have been taught about homeschooling is like the shiny happy people documentary business, right? Like there is still that idea, even though a friend of mine just asked me what I thought the breakdown was between like shiny happy people version of homeschooling and like a more progressive version of homeschooling these days. And I was like, I think that these days with how much it has grown in just the last 5 years, really it's probably like at least 50-50. But we just don't hear about it, and it hasn't like the overall cultural shift hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not, there's so much more to it. And it's,
well, and I think we're not as well organized. I mean, I can speak for where I live because I live in the South, right? So much homeschool organization and activity is done through the church. And so even if it's not your church, you can still hop over to someone else's church for a thing. And so I think secular homeschoolers have had a harder time organizing because even just trying to find space sometimes for a co-op can be really, really difficult. Like, we don't have a ton of money to rent out like some big thing. And I mean, we were part of a secular co-op that I absolutely love, but we 1000% met in a Baptist church because they had a ton of classrooms because they had a really big religious education program. It was empty during the week. They wanted money, so it was like, it worked for all of us, and, but there was all sorts of, and listen, I'm not opposed to being in a church. It doesn't bother me, but there are plenty of secular homeschoolers who have religious trauma and things like that, where that would not be an option for them. And I completely understand that. So I think we're just not as well organized. We haven't quite found our clustering abilities yet as secular homeschoolers. So, which is one of the reasons why we've tried to build our own community, through Facebook group and Patreon and things like that. Like, let's start to organize a little bit differently. Let's start to come together and support one another because there's tons of us out there. We're just really scattered.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another common one that you'll hear a lot of times is like, how will they ever go to college, right? And they'll go to college just like everybody else will go to college. It'll be just fine. So we just did a whole series on transcripts and portfolios and college applications. So if you're concerned about college, send them those episodes. Goodness knows we love the viewership. So send them on over. And again, they probably won't watch them. They'll just continue to throw objections at you. So
Yeah.
it's all good. So before we break down our strategies for you, we wanted to remind you and say a huge thank you to our amazing sponsor. So they're a relatively new sponsor for us. It is a new platform for homeschoolers called Recess. And Recess's mission is to help homeschoolers make friends and develop hard skills. They have a really interesting approach that is inspired by Maria Montessori and the MIT Media Lab.
Yeah, so here's how they do it. They meet your kid where they're at in their favorite games. And then in those games, they offer them harder and harder challenges to turn their interests into real skills, right? This totally plays into what we were just talking about last week in this whole idea of game schooling, right? You can learn real skills while still using games, that kind of stuff. So everything they do is centered around kids being social together and working together. And every class comes with a moderated chat so that your kids can talk to their friends outside of that dedicated class time.
I love that because that is so often missing.
Mm-hmm.
But probably the best part, or at least my favorite part, is their mission to understand every kid. The teachers come together. They have a small, dedicated group of teachers who are totally amazing. And they spend time really trying to understand what each kid needs and how they can help them grow from their starting point. So it's super different from other class marketplaces or online classes in that way, because their goal is to really keep, as they grow, keep that feeling of community and that support structure that they're building into their platform.
Yeah. So if helping your kids make friends and giving them a child-led education sounds interesting, check out their website at recess.gg. That's RECESS.gg. Parents from amazing institutions like Harvard, MIT, Princeton, NVIDIA, Apple, and plenty more. Trust their classes, right? So the quality is fantastic. And really, I think it's that thing. We're all just looking for quality resources that fit our kids and help them become the amazing humans we know they're meant to be. And Recess might just be that resource for you and your family. Thanks to Recess for sponsoring this week's podcast. And yeah, definitely let us know in the comments or over email or private message what you think. We would people and we rope our kids into helping us try things out. And we are constantly looking for new ideas and resources and things to recommend and suggest. But we love the feedback. So we would love to hear from you.
Yes. Next week's episode will be all feedback from our kids from a project that we've been having them do. And it's been very interesting working with a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old to give research feedback. But it's been awesome. I'm so excited for next week's episode. But it's been quite the adventure teaming up with our kids to work on it. So it's exciting.
Yeah. They're feedback varies. Quality of feedback varies. We'll put it that way. And it's tied directly to how many hours they've already done other stuff. This is the case for most of us, right? In fairness, as is the case with most of us. All right. So back to what we were talking about. So we have a few different ways to address this backlash, right? So you can take the informative approach. And I think that really, for the most part, this is probably the kindest, most gentle way. If the person seems like they have a sincere interest in learning more about homeschooling and, they actually want to have a conversation and they want to share information, jump in for a chat. So it is by far the kindest approach, but it definitely does take more effort and energy. And, I don't always have that. None of us always have it. None of us have an unlimited store of energy. And for some of us, we have even fewer spoons on a daily basis. That said, I love sharing my experiences and my opinions, and I love learning from other people's perspectives, right? That's totally my jam. I might not be able to walk a mile in your shoes, but I want to have an understanding or a better understanding of what's happening in your life. So as long as people are genuinely curious to learn and open to seeing things from another perspective, absolutely have that conversation. Have the conversation about, well, no, I'm not worried about them going to college because they can absolutely go to college. And in fact, if you Google whatever university you're thinking of and homeschool application, there's an entire website full of information on how to apply, or you might say, no, I'm not worried about them missing prom because there are proms for homeschool kids. And that also doesn't change the fact that their public school friends might invite them to go to prom with them. There are loads of options, and there are field trips and there are overnight trips for homeschool kids. Those things are all organized. Most people do not realize that those resources are there and available. And so just shining a light on that and helping them see it, it can go a long ways in just general understanding.
Yeah, I mean, hello, we all did. You were a Midwesterner growing up, but on the East Coast, Amanda, it's the Washington, D.C. trip, right? That's the trip that you do, right? And so it's a standard thing. And I'm sure there's things in other states too, where you go to the state capitol, or there's kind of this standard 8th grade field trip or whatever it is, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, for public school kids, there's 2 nights at Universal Studios or whatever, all that stuff. But my kid is going to Greece and Turkey for 6 weeks next year. I'm pretty sure he's not missing out. He's good. I'm like, that's the experience of a lifetime. He's already preparing a menu of all the things he wants to eat because he's a foodie. So he's like, I'm there for it, right? So yeah, our kids are not missing out. There's so much stuff. You just have to find it. And really, if you join a whole bunch of Facebook groups, it's not hard to find that stuff. It'll all kind of, or you listen to us because we like to share all that good stuff with you. So,
yep.
So yeah, but I agree. I've gotten less and less. There's just only so many times I can tell people the same thing over and over. You know what I mean? It's hard. You have to really want to keep that relationship, and you have to really, I at least have to really get a vibe from the person that they are genuinely curious for me to take that much time and energy out of my already stretched thin life. So.
Yeah, no,
but
actually,
it
reminds me just yesterday, there was someone who was saying oh, I want to move to this neighborhood where you are. I live in the Netherlands. I want to move to this neighborhood where you are. And one of my kids has a long list of diagnoses and we need this, and they would like to, we'd like to have swim and art and all of these things in school. Like, what school should we look at? And people were like, well, I'm not sure you're going to find exactly what you're looking for in like actually in a school program. But you're definitely going to want to look at the IEP process. Like he's going to need an IEP to go into school here in the United States and, these kinds of things. And I just said, I don't actually know much about that neighborhood. And by all means, look into the schools there and see if you find one that fits. But you might want to think about homeschooling and what that could look like for your family and how it might fit him better, especially in California with the programs that are in place. Because we do have this, these homeschool charters where you still get some of the support, but you're not in an actual classroom setting. And so you can make swimming one of your classes and, and you get money to pay for that and, all of this kind of stuff. And I kind of said, something about just like being open to exploring what homeschooling in the United States really can look like, because I know it's not the same as what it is in the Netherlands. And she immediately hit back like, absolutely not. I do not want him home alone by himself, the only student in his class. And I was like,
that's why I said you might want to explore learning about it.
You might want to open your mind a little, and it was that thing. I just said, you know what? I hope you find what you're looking for. I really recommend a day in our shoes for your IEP process. And again, I think you might benefit from really opening your mind about homeschooling and what exactly that means. And walked away, like unfollowed the thread, because like clearly it's not going to go anywhere at this point.
Right.
Like he will be the only person by himself at home for the rest of his life. I'm not homeschooling. But that's not actually how homeschooling works at all. But okay, like, okay.
I'm going to need you to remember that person's name so that in a year's time, when she's like, school is a disaster, does anybody have recommendations for a private school? And you're like, I would like to encourage you to look into homeschool.
Just copy and paste it every year when she comes back asking for new ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I don't think you know what you're in for here in public school, but have fun, lady.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, our next suggestion is called the give them the homework approach. And we've already talked about this a little bit, but it's another polite way to shut down conversation. So whatever is your speed, right? We suggested that study, but if you have a couple of homeschooling books, especially if you have one that kind of really shaped your view of homeschooling, right? Have that in your head, that you can kind of toss out. Maybe a TED Talk. I love TED Talks. I just think they're amazing, right? A podcast like Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. Different social accounts where you can see things, right? Like sometimes people will say like, can I follow, there'll be threads on social media. Like, I would love to follow some homeschool accounts just to like get a feel for what homeschooling is, right? And sometimes I'll throw my daughters in there and say like, okay, so she's a teen, but she's got a decent presence on social media, right? So I'm like, if you want to see like what her day-to-day looks like and what she's up to and how she speaks publicly and how she carries herself and see what the result of homeschooling is, there you go. So maybe there's some social accounts, whether they're homeschooled kids or whether it's homeschooled families, homeschool education, that are out there, kind of have those so that you can throw that out there. So you might say something like, I've done tons of research about homeschooling, so I don't really share your concern. But if it's a concern for you, I'd recommend John Taylor Gatto's book, Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling. It'll definitely provide you with insight into your question about XYZ, right? And again, they'll probably never read it, but if they come back to you again, be like, oh, did you not have a chance to read that book? Like so confused, like, oh, I answered your question. I gave you a resource to help you with that, right? And there's only so many times that they're going to be like, I know you keep telling me to read that book and I'm never going to do it, but I'm still going to continue to question you on it. Like at some point it's going to get weird and they're going to have to stop, right?
I refuse to educate myself, but I'm going to continue to complain and make it your problem.
Judge your kid and judge the way you're choosing to raise your children,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So the give them homework approach.
Yeah, no, totally. All right. So those were a couple nice ways. The next way is we like to to call it the no fucks given approach. Okay. So you can respond with something related to the question and just shut it down, right? So for example, you might say something like, that isn't actually how it works. And it isn't a concern for us. We are, however, very confident that we've made the best choice for our child. End of story, right?
Done.
Or maybe it's something more specific and you would say, we aren't worrying about college at this early stage of kindergarten, but we are confident that we've made the best choice for our child. And if you really want to be nice in your no fucks given approach, which doesn't necessarily go together, but if you're easing into it and you want to be nice, you can follow it up with, and I respect that you're making the choices that you feel are best for your child as well, right? I respect what you're doing. And you're basically saying, are you going to respect what I'm doing, or are you going to be the ass in this conversation?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. So similar to the no fucks given approach, we've got the burning bridge approach, right? If it's a loose acquaintance or somebody that you won't lose sleep at night, if this person is no longer in your life, you can come back with something equally as ignorant or judgmental about the original question, right? So, if somebody says, aren't you afraid your kids are going to be weird and awkward? You could reply with, aren't you afraid that yours will die scared and alone in a closet during a mass shooting, right? I mean, the end, right? Chances are it'll end the conversation. It might end the friendship. It probably wasn't a great friendship in the end if you went with the burning bridge approach. But the key with those last two, the burning bridge approach and the no fucks given approach, is that you have to own them, right? They need to be your biggest big girl panties, right? It needs to be clipped and firm and like the end, right? This is not up for discussion. These are my kids. You are raising your kids, or maybe you're not even raising, in which case really stop telling me how to raise my kids, right?
Yeah.
But the end, not up for discussion.
Yeah.
And you can do that. You're a grown up. You can.
That's it. That's the thing, right? You do not have to answer to anyone outside of your home about the choices you've made for your children. I mean, obviously there's some exceptions to that. If the courts call you into court for some reason, like I would answer to them. But, for the purposes of this discussion, you get to decide how you raise your children. It's parenting, and education falls under that umbrella. Feel free to send this episode to your Karen neighbor or your meddling mother-in-law. Let them know that Meagan and Amanda have given you permission to raise your kids how you see fit. The end. Done.
Boom.
Full stop.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So Amanda has quite the WTF moment for us coming up in our next segment. But before we jump into that, we wanted to extend an invite to come and hang out with us over on Patreon. There's a free unit study about hurricanes waiting for you over there. And all Patreon members will receive a themed unit study once a month. Our VIPs also get invited to 2 live meetings per month with both Amanda and myself. We offer personalized homeschool support, secular community, and it is $12 a month. I don't know about you, but when I hear VIP, I think like, oh, it's one of those, like, if you have to ask how much it is, you can't afford it kind of things, right? And that is not the vibe we are going for in our Patreon. We are trying to make it accessible to absolutely as many people as humanly possible. So yes, come and hang out with us. I mean, if you take the unit study out of it and you're just looking at the 2 live meetings for $12 a month, it's $6 a meeting. And I don't know anywhere that you're going to get personalized homeschool coaching with veteran homeschoolers for $6 an hour, right? Like, it's just not a thing. And then you get the unit study and all sorts of stuff on top of that. So it's pretty awesome. So this episode will come out at the beginning of September. The September unit study is an in-depth exploration of the labor movement, which we hope you will love. And you can find the link to join us in the podcast description. You can always message us for it if you can't find it, whatever, etc. It'll be awesome. But we would love to have you come hang out with us over on Patreon. All right, so Amanda, you have something that has popped up in your week that has blown your mind, and so let's get to it.
Things that make your host say, what the
So what did it for you this week?
Yeah, so as Meagan mentioned, right, this episode's coming out the beginning of September. I think pretty much around the United States, brick and mortar schools have headed back into the new school year. And that's the case here where I live. And moms around my school district are absolutely freaking out because, wait for it, many schools in our school district, in our local school district, have implemented a no running policy. Now, I know what you might be thinking, right? Like, yeah, that makes sense. Kids shouldn't be running in the hallways or the cafeteria. I totally agree with you. Kids should not be running in the school. The problem is, it's not just in the school. Kids are not allowed to run at recess. Yeah. I like, are we sure? And that was the thing, right? When it first came up, it was like, are you sure they meant at recess? And she's like, oh no, I clarified. I went to the principal and was like, is this really what? And there was all of these moms who were like, yeah, our school too. Our school too. And it was all of these different schools all around the county. I was like, holy smokes, right? So yeah, I come to our school, sit still, be quiet, focus for 7 hours a day, but make sure that when you get your 15-minute recess, you don't accidentally run. We can't have running, right? We wouldn't want you to, like actually release your stress or pent up energy or anything. We just want you to be quiet and behave, because elementary kids are so well known for never running. And
why are they not allowed to run? I don't even like, what the heck?
It's one of those things. I think it's probably has to do with the fact that we're in a city and a lot of the recesses happen on concrete, on paved blacktops. Like we don't have a lot of fields and things like that. And I mean, I know of some schools that have, like rooftop, the playground is actually on the top of the building and things like that. So I'm guessing it's like a safety concern and like, oh, how do we deal with all the skinned knees or something like that?
Like, I'll send my kids to school with Band-Aids. Just let them run.
Right.
I used to get nervous. I mean, my kids grew up in South Florida and they were outside. I mean, we have amazing weather, right? So the kids were outside all the time. I mean, afternoons, they were in the park, they were in the playground. They were part of this neighborhood posse of about 16 kids that were all kind of in similar ages. And I mean, they'd be outside, they'd come home at the end of the night, they'd be disgusting, right? And I would take them to the pediatrician and I'd be nervous because sometimes both knees would be skinned, their elbows would be skinned. They would have their shin bone going down their legs would be just bruised all the way because from climbing out of the pool. And you know how you kind of like, you put your hands and you hoist up and then you throw that one leg and the shin hits the side of the pool. Or like if they'd be climbing on a play structure in the park or something, and the same thing, they'd go to climb and their shin bone would hit the side. And I remember being nervous at the pediatrician because you hear stories, and I remember one time being like, they play a lot and that's why and she was like, oh, this is childhood. This is what I want to see. Like, I want to see bruises, not bruises, not bruises in random places, but like these kinds, like she goes, this is clearly kids who play outside. Like there's dirt under their fingernails, like they're happy, And I'm like, they're not going to die. They'll be fine. Like, let them skin their knees. What do you say? They're never supposed to skin their knees? Like, I can't.
Well, that's it. And, my kiddo goes to a once a week drop off class. We've talked about that before. And one of the requirements is that he brings a personal first aid kit. And you better believe that in that personal first aid kit are those knee bandages, right? Like the 4 kind, because he skins his knees all the time. Like, this is not like, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. I mean, like he's got some wipes to clean it if he needs to. He's got some antibiotic ointment to put on there until he gets home and we can actually wash it. And, like I don't know. It's sad. It's just really sad to me that we've gotten to a point where we can't say, hey, along with your crayons that you need to have for class, can you make sure you buy one of those packages of knee bandages so that if they fall, they're okay? No, instead we're just going to say like, no running at all day because kids always walk. I don't know the number of times, even now, the number of times when my kiddo gets together with other friends that you're like, please walk, please walk. Like,
they get excited.
That's it,
And I feel like for the kids who have like sensory challenges or ADHD or something like that too, like they're so desperately in need of that release when they do get their measly little recess in school. It's bananas. Well, I feel like that actually, though, like now that you're saying that, I'm like, hold on, this dovetails into our theme for the day perfectly. Like, if you're going with the burning the bridge, be like, oh, and your kids are in an environment where they're not even allowed to move like faster than, point whatever miles per hour, I mean, what the heck? It's so sad. I know my kids, so I have tree climbers. My older two, my younger one is a very cautious,
You're not allowed to touch
like,
the trees. Not
you
even, you
can't even
can't.
touch
Yeah,
them.
that was one of the things. People were like, I can understand not being allowed to climb the tree, but not allowed to touch the tree. Like, imagine the world where you write that in your, like, make sure that the rules say no touching the trees.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no. Oh my gosh. All right. Yeah. So I have my older two like to climb trees, specifically my daughter. My daughter, she would climb the banyans in Florida, and I'm not even like other mothers would judge me at the park for how high I would let her climb. But she was fun. She's never gotten hurt. I mean, she would literally be like a good 3, 4, 5 stories up in trees sometimes.
Wow.
And I'd let her go. The funny thing was when we moved to North Carolina and she tried to climb a pine for the first time, and I didn't stop her because I didn't know how far she was going to get. And then she realized how weak pines are at the time
Yeah.
because like they
Yeah.
thin out. And she got sappy and she looked like Clark Griswold from Christmas Vacation when he gets the magazine pages stuck to his finger because she'd never seen a northern tree. She'd never climbed a northern tree before. She was born and raised in Miami. But yeah, so I used to walk up to the school at the end of the day to pick my kids up, and there were a couple of moms that I would always chat with, and the kids would come out, and sometimes the kids would drop their backpacks and run around for a little bit while the moms and I finished up our conversations. And one of my kids started to, I mean, it was a really small tree. It was not like, this huge thing. And they came right over. Oh, no, can't climb the tree. And I'm like, I'm standing right here. Like, no, can't climb the tree. They could get hurt. And I'm like, yeah, they could, but kids have been falling out of trees for years. Like, I mean, it's just obviously you don't want them to be like tragically hurt, but that's part of it. And it was interesting because I actually read a study about how climbing trees builds different neural pathways than playgrounds do, because on a playground, everything is always very intuitive the way it's built, right? So there's always a handhold where there should be, there's always a foothold where there should be, there's safety mechanisms in place. But if you're climbing a tree, all of that has to be done in your head as you're climbing, right? You have to figure out, you have to problem solve. Where am I going to put my hand? You have to test it. Is this secure before you let go of the other thing? All that kind of stuff. And they talked about how that builds different passageways of thought process in your brain, and how kids nowadays are losing that because they're not allowed to climb trees or apparently touch them, So yeah, I mean, don't be reckless, but kids can do dangerous things. They have been for centuries. It's okay, right? Like moderately dangerous, right? Like, I'm not saying they should learn knife swallowing as part of their homeschooling activities, but like, climbing trees is okay. Running is okay. Yeah, well, there you go. So that should definitely give people, figure out what wacky things your public school system is doing, right? I mean, that'll give you some more ammunition when people question you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be like, oh, but my kid's allowed to touch a tree. Watch them. They're doing it right now. Look, touching. Too dangerous. All right. Well, our end of episode mantra for the day is your choices in homeschooling are rooted in love and wisdom. Stand firm. And remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation for what is best for your kids. And that includes your mother-in-law. Okay? We said so. Okay? Send it to her. Just be like, oh, I heard this and I thought it would be super interesting for you. I hope you enjoy it. Send. Like, leave me alone. These are my kids. You've raised your kids. I'm living with one of them. You want me to tell you how well that's going? I'm not taking your advice. Okay? Okay?
She said it,
Yeah.
not me. Just because I put ditto under it does not mean that I said it.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Next week's episode, we are going to be giving you feedback from our kids on Time for Learning, on Khan Academy, on IXL, on Mia Academy, on all these different online platforms that people are using. We'll talk about our experience as the adult, but then we'll also give you kid feedback so that you don't have to put your kid through 10 programs to figure out what kids think about them. We'll give you a little bit of an insight. So I'm super excited for next week's episode. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
So have an awesome week and happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.